Most of the bad things that happen are a result of the people they possess.
It's almost an old money versus new money conversation.
Exactly.
No, I am the father.
And here we go.
That belongs in a museum.
Are you telling me that you built a time machine? Out of a DeLorean?
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
This is Sparta!
Remember, with great power comes great responsibility.
Dr. Grant, my dear Dr. Sattler, welcome to Jurassic Park.
Welcome back to another episode of Easily Entertained. I'm your host, Bryson, and I'm joined once again by co-host Cormick. Oh! Today we are talking about a horror movie, which is kind of a surprise for the summer.
True, yeah.
They don't usually come out. So we are talking Talk to Me, which is a new horror movie that came out. It's not really very widely known. It's not been released everywhere. It's more of an independent film. It was picked up by A24, and it's fun little horror Australian film done by a couple of YouTubers. It is magnificent.
Yeah,
I really like it. So the whole story of Talk to Me, I'll kind of give a little brief rundown so you guys know what's happening if you haven't seen it or if you want to go see it. The way Talk to Me is, it's a bunch of teenagers. They get this relic of like a hand. It's said to be a hand of a psychic that could commune with spirits. And they go through this little ritual of lighting a candle, grabbing it, and saying, "Talk to me." Title of the film. Roll credits.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's that simple. But saying that causes a spirit to appear, and then you can say, "I let you in," and they get possessed by a spirit, and they get this little experience of the person who's possessing them. And as you can imagine, because you're messing around with paranormal activity, things go very wrong.
Shenanigans ensue.
Yeah, and they kind of get tricked by some demons instead of just normal spirits. And so that's kind of where our story kicks off. And I loved how they did it. It felt weirdly natural to watch.
Yeah.
It felt like something you would kind of see people trying to get into in the modern day, like kind of how the Ouija board was a huge thing for such a long time. It feels like the same kind of thing. People be like, "Ooh, I can talk to the spirits by grabbing this little hand." Be like, "Don't do that.
Yeah.
Don't mess with spirits.
It
You're an idiot."
it had an eerily real feeling, for sure.
Which I think for a horror movie, you need that.
Oh, yeah.
To have a good horror movie.
Right, true.
Because I feel like a lot of horror movies nowadays, it's the jump scares is what they heavily rely on. And after so many jump scares, you're like, "I saw that one coming. This was going to be a jump scare. That's going to be a jump scare."
You shrug them off.
Yeah, and so you have to actually use them properly, because you can have a really intense buildup of suspense and actually make the jump scare pay off, but a lot of movies don't do that. But I like how this movie did it, and they fit it into a natural kind of environment. It made it feel genuine in its horror, and I absolutely love that. And I think part of that comes with the writing being fairly modern. And so how the story kind of goes is people keep filming these little possessions happening.
Right, that's the whole idea, is that they've got the hand that does the thing, what have you, and they're not just doing it to do it, because that's not, I mean, it's weird to say, but times have changed.
Yeah.
And that's not what people do anymore. They're at least half of the experience, especially folks at this age, are they're thinking, how can I put this on the internet?
Yeah, how can I show this to everybody else? It brings me back very much to the don't watch this at 3 a.m. YouTube video style, when people would be doing little like Bloody Mary rituals or playing with Ouija boards, like that kind of stuff where you're messing with paranormal type of things, but not really like wanting to do it just to have the experience. You're like, how can I put this on the internet and do that kind of stuff?
It's got a huge social aspect to it.
Exactly. And it kind of makes sense being that it's done by YouTubers. Like, of course, they're going to fit social media somehow into it, but it doesn't feel out of place.
Yeah.
Exactly. It doesn't feel like they're putting it in just to put it in. It has a reason.
It might be the most fantastic use of social media in a film we're yet to see, if I'm being totally honest. It's really effective.
And I think that adds to the genuine horror feel to it, because it's all these teenagers. So you're not really, like, obviously you're going into it knowing things are going to go wrong, but the way the story is, you're like, oh, things are kind of just, they're goofing around. It's not really going to escalate all that much. And then it takes a turn so quick, fast.
The pacing is so fantastic with that.
Exactly. Because, like, being that it's on social media, you feel like a lot of the content you consume is very controlled. And the movie wants you to feel this way at the beginning. Things are very controlled. You grasp the hand, they light a candle, you say, talk to me, a spirit opens. You get possessed for a little bit. After a certain amount of time, they remove the hand so the spirit's disconnected. They blow it out. You're fine. And so that feels very controlled. Everything has a sense of control at the beginning. But then they lose that control. It's after the younger brother, one of the main characters, he decides he wants to join in on the fun. It's kind of like this almost like gateway drug kind of representation.
Yeah, there's a lot of symbolism with the ritual and how that's like representing vices. I mean, particularly it's drugs in this case, but in interviews that we've watched, their intention is to represent kind of any vice.
Yeah, you're wanting an escape from the world. And to a lot of our characters, they've had significant trauma in their life, so it makes sense. And so naturally, one of these younger kids, they're like, I want to be part of this experience as well. I want my own vice kind of thing.
Yeah.
But then that's where things go really wrong, because he ends up getting possessed more by a demon that wants to kill him.
A darker spirit, for sure.
And so he starts trying to kill himself, banging his head on the ground, kind of being thrown every which way, and they can't stop him.
Right.
And so you lose this sense of control.
Because they broke the rules of the ritual.
Exactly. And that causes the tension to go to an extreme level.
And it stays there.
Yeah. It makes you hold your breath the entire time.
Yeah.
Like probably half the movie, I'm sitting there like
tight, clenched. What is going on?
Barely breathing at all, just because I am nervous for these characters. And I think it helps because they are so believable as teenagers. They're actual teenagers and young adults. It's not 30 or 40 year olds trying to play teenagers, no matter how much they look like them.
Yep.
You have to have real young actors to be able to portray these proper feelings and emotions, because they're going through them themselves.
Yep.
You have to have that realism, and that all builds up and adds to the genuine horror of the film. And I think that's how most horror films should be doing it. They have to have real characters, have real emotions in them, and not just be doing it, we're going to make them get jump scared. That's not what we go for. We want that adrenaline.
It's just an older idea, because it certainly worked before, but
yes,
that's before, and now
that's before corporate greed kind of took over,
and just before we've watched enough films with that. Now the scene has changed for it. We're demanding a little bit more story to our horror rather than just watching people die.
Yeah, it's less of the torture porn era and more of actually wanting to have real characters that you fear for.
Yeah, we want to invest.
Exactly. And so I kind of like that. And then on top of that, although this is dealing with paranormal, like spirits and demons and ritual kind of stuff, it doesn't feel out of place.
Nope.
It feels very much like real. It feels like you could do this yourself. Like, obviously, you can't. I mean, good luck. Don't do it. That's a terrible idea. We've all seen how bad things can go.
Certainly.
But it feels real. It feels like this could happen. And that's kind of surprising, especially for like a foreign film, because it is all Australian. Because they were originally going to be bought out by, I don't know if they announced what company it was going to be from, but they were going to be bought and the vision was going to change a lot. But they wanted it to be real people. They wanted it in Australia. They wanted actual Australian actors.
The long and short of it, they wanted their creative control.
Exactly. And so, like, foreign films in the US don't always do very well. And when you have, especially horror, because I feel like horror is a big genre for foreign films, you tend to not get scared as much because you can kind of disconnect from it. Because you're like, this is in a place where it's not going to really affect me.
Mm-hmm.
It is completely out of my control. It doesn't feel like that in this movie. It feels like an experience you could have any day in your life. And so, like, bringing the paranormal demon ritual type stuff into a real setting that anyone could feel like they could experience builds it up and doesn't make it out of place.
Yeah.
Whereas I think other kind of shows like The Conjuring, Insidious, things like that, even if they are really well done, I love The Conjuring
They're
movies.
just a little more pie in the sky compared to this.
Yeah, they seem more disconnected. You're not going to feel like this could really happen to you. It doesn't hit that same personality to it.
Yeah.
And I like that this movie does. It makes you actually scared.
Yeah, I think a big part of that is how, again, the pacing and the writing, where it happens with teenagers. They're like, every moment that the hand is brought into it and they're doing the ritual, it's always, well, it seems to me always a peer pressure moment.
Mm-hmm.
And there's always just the, oh, you do it, you go ahead and do it, like, we're just doing this.
Yeah.
And there's a few moments where instead of kind of peer pressure, it's more like someone trying to give into the vice, but it's really easy to buy into a situation like that.
Yeah.
Rather than, oh, my house is haunted.
Mm-hmm.
It's more that this object is haunted and we're all being peer pressured into an item here. It's a very, very effective metaphor that they've got going on with the ritual in the hand. It's really good for, I mean, I'm going to say pretty much everybody, because whether you know it or not, you've got a vice of some kind, and you will attach to this story.
Yeah. And it plays with the mind along with those vices. It's a lot of mind over matter. Even though it's dealing with paranormal type stuff, I feel like what happens is that becomes physical. People think of the real world application to it. They don't think about the headspace that you get pulled into, how it kind of warps your brain a little bit. One of the characters even starts seeing their dead mom everywhere, even though they're not actively doing the ritual all the time.
Right.
And so it gets into their heads and it makes them lose that control.
Because, again, they broke the ritual rules.
Exactly.
They broke the pattern.
Mm-hmm. They gave into that vice too much.
Mm-hmm.
And so that causes them to kind of break apart from this group that feels like a familial unit.
Right.
And in numbers, there's safety in numbers.
Yeah, because the group together, they are safe. It's the hand, the vice, that's the real danger.
Exactly. So when they go off and do it alone, they're way more vulnerable, and you feel more scared for those characters.
Yeah, which is a very good part of the way they structured the ritual, that there's a candle and somebody else has to blow it out, because the person who's, they
can't do it
possessed,
themselves.
they can't blow it out because the possessed person doesn't want to leave, obviously. They're like, I've got a body now. So that's like a very, again, just the ritual itself, I could dive into so much. It's really just, there's so many little bits where you're like, man, that is a very fantastic representation of what it can be like when you're in those triggering moments. And with our main character Mia and her seeing her mom, that kind of representation of her vice, it's not, I mean, from our perspective of watching the movie, I guess it's not ever really explicitly stated. That is never really her mom.
Yeah.
It's always been the first ghost that she let in, because she goes over a few seconds. They mention it once. She's like, you're a little bit over. You're only allowed to do it for like up to 90 seconds is the idea there. And so from that point on, her vice is taking control or is haunting her, right? And so that is a very, again, really good representation of what it might be like for someone who has a vice. There's those little triggering moments where that thing is lying to you.
Yeah.
It's lying to you, always is. And it's like, oh, my mom, this is helping me cope.
It's taking the face of someone you're familiar with, you trust very well, and it's manipulating you into doing other things.
Because you think it's helping you cope, when all the while it's really there to hurt you and your friends.
And I think a big part of that is like when Mia accidentally kills her dad.
Yes.
Because the demons are manipulating her into thinking her dad's a bad person and killed her mom, and he just wants to help her and feels bad because it was a suicide and things like that. And so they manipulate her into killing him as well.
Yeah.
And so they make her think that he's hurting her, and then just at the right moment when he's actually coming to help, that's when she kills him.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's this manipulation that really gets into their minds and makes you feel like, oh no, this could get into my mind.
Yeah, and just to speak to that scene, the way that scene is paced and is orchestrated, oh my gosh, you are so jarred in the best way.
Yeah.
That was one of my favorite scenes of when that, like, because I was like, something's up. It's a little fishy at the beginning. You're like, well, I can't exactly understand it, because there's a tender moment where he's honest with her for once, you know, finally being honest with her daughter, with his daughter, and just saying, you know, sincere stories, and then she kind of snaps because the vice kicks in just a little. The vice says, he's lying to you. And then so she runs up to her room, and oh man, it's just, you got to go see it, because that scene alone is worth it. It was so fantastic to just see. And then you're like, whoa, what just happened?
And I love that the demons, like, because of this mind manipulation thing, most of the bad things that happen are a result of the people they possess. It is not the demons being all powerful like it is in a lot of other media.
Right.
Because I feel like what happens a lot is movies, they're like, oh, it's this extra powerful demon that we have to try and stop. These are pretty much regular, like, tortured spirits that are trying to...
That's something I like as well about it, because they don't ever really say that it's a demon. The kids themselves don't really understand it, which is a huge part of it. You're not going to understand something that takes that kind of control over you. Again, the vice representation. But yeah, they don't ever really, label these spirits. They just kind of say spirits that are attaching, and then there's like a certain one that is, supposedly controlling the situation. Yeah. And it's just, I don't know, man. It's really interesting to try and cipher which spirits are which. Yeah. Because they don't tell you. And I love
it's less of like how in like The Conjuring, there's usually like a good spirit that's trying to protect everyone and just scare them away. And then there's a demon that's trying to take over everything. In this, you don't know, because all of them are being manipulative. And so it feels more like real life. It feels like being manipulated by a real person. Like when you are under a vice, and usually, like in the case of drugs, you have a dealer that is wanting you to constantly buy more. And so they're helping to manipulate you to get you addicted so that you keep coming back. And that's how these demons act. They make you feel good this first time, getting this weird possession, kind of losing control and letting someone else take the driver's seat. And then they use that to keep manipulating you into coming back. And I love that overall vice metaphor for everything. I think it's fantastic. And it makes you feel genuinely scared for these characters. And I love that we're seeing more things like this in the genre, in the filmmaking genre overall, of creators understanding how these kinds of stories work and going through it. And especially with these guys, they're I think they still currently are YouTubers that just understand how to storytell, and you will use these aspects to make a good story, even though the industry doesn't necessarily take them very seriously. Because it's something that kind of happens a lot with YouTubers, is they're not taken seriously by film studios. They're like, well, you guys are making things for free. You're kind of just doing it for the views. And I'm like, well, that's necessarily what you're doing. You're just doing it on a much bigger budget. Right. And so they don't get taken seriously as much. And these independent creators were like, screw it, we're going to do what we want.
It's almost an old money versus new money conversation.
Exactly. And it's clearly a passion project for them.
Oh, yeah.
Like the level of quality and the detail that they put into the story writing. Like we've talked about the rules of the ritual a lot.
Right.
They don't break them. They follow those rules. And if the characters break them, there are consequences. Yeah. That's not always the case in these kind of movies. If someone breaks a rule, they're like, whatever. We're just going to kind of continue. They stick to it strictly, in this. And
it doesn't pull any punches.
Exactly. And so that makes it all the more real, because that's just how real life is. If you have strict rules and you break them, there are going to be consequences.
You're going to get burnt.
Mm-hmm. And I love seeing this independent filmmaker rise in the industry.
Yeah.
I think it's fantastic.
When you can tell there's so much love in a project. I mean, we kind of talked about it with Across the Spider-Verse. You could just tell how much love was put into a film like these. You can just tell, and that's why. I mean, it's starting to reflect in their reviews. 95 on Rotten Tomatoes. That's huge. That's huge.
Yeah, it understands that these kind of people, they understand stories. They understand how to make their audience feel emotions. And that's why they're the studio that picked them up to distribute it across the world. A24, why I think they are doing so well in the industry right now, because they support creative visions.
Yep.
It's not like Disney or DreamWorks or Warner Brothers, where they have a corporate mindset.
Right.
They will give some creative freedom, but for the most part, they're like, we need to do what'll get people in seats and what's going to make money.
They need to protect our brand.
Exactly. A24 supports the creators and understands they know what's good for the story and what will make it the best it can be. And so getting this rise of filmmaking that is actually being led creatively and not just under a corporate mindset is what's making them all so good, because we're having a lot of more independent kind of things picked up. Another A24 series that if you watch a lot of YouTube, you have heard of and is hopefully supposed to be released soon. It's an animated series called Has Been Hotel, which is a really fun little lore building thing about demons as well, funny enough, but it's like about the afterlife and what it's like to live in hell. Yeah. And then you also have other YouTubers making their own kind of stories, like Markiplier. He's doing the Iron Lung movie that's supposed to come out this fall, isn't it? Like,
it's
like in a couple months.
It's on the cusp.
And I like that we're taking more risks. I love independent filmmakers kind of coming back. I think especially in amidst the strikes and things like that, with all this corporate greed and worry about the vision of creative people, becoming more independent and seeing this rise of new types of stories and new ways to tell these stories is fantastic. And I love that we're seeing so much of it.
It's awesome to see the guerrilla filmmaking. Really. Yeah. And having those, because that's how most things starts, as a guerrilla operation. And so it's interesting that that's on the rise now because of what's happening, in the higher ups, where they've kind of altered the direction a little too much and then taken a little too much. So now we've gone kind of back to the roots, sort of. Yeah. Not really. I mean, the technology's vastly different. Yeah. But that makes it a little more accessible.
Yeah, so. It's how a lot of industries like this have started. It was creative people starting, and then other companies realized they can make money off of it.
Right.
And for a while, that was great because they could provide big budgets to make bigger movies.
Right. Mutually beneficial.
Exactly. But then it became more about the money than the creative vision itself. Because not only is this in the film industry, but you can just think of the artist industry in general. Think of Michelangelo, Da Vinci. They were paid to just make art. It wasn't a return on investment that was really thought about. They just figured, we're going to have something nice to look at.
Yeah, they know what they're doing. Trust them, give them the money.
Exactly. And then companies and more capitalistic mindsets came in, realizing we can also get money back from this. Mm-hmm. And now I feel like we're shifting back to that original, wanting to make creators do it just because.
Yep.
Because it benefits the world. It doesn't have to completely stimulate the economy the way we really think it has to. It can just be because it's enjoyable. Because I don't know if I've said this on the podcast before, but I know I've talked to Cormick about it. I think there are 4 aspects of surviving. Mm-hmm. There is food, water, shelter. That's the basic needs you really need to survive. But to live, you need stories. And stories come through art forms of any kind.
Yep.
And I think that's where we're heading back to, is what it seems like. Anyways.
It's a super interesting cycle, and it seems with, beefier tech, the cycle is rapid.
Exactly. And I think with independent, like, filmmakers in this case of the art of film, horror is definitely the way it's going to take it back to there. Because I feel that that's how a lot of filmmakers get their start, is a horror film. Specifically, like, short horror films. We watched one yesterday called The Project of God?
Portrait of God. It's on YouTube. Highly suggest.
It's a really good one. But it's independent creators creating stories that can hit those emotions rather their fear emotions. But that's our most common, like, driver.
Yeah. I mean, everybody's scared of something. That's why horror is a very fascinating genre to be in.
Exactly.
And honestly, a pretty good place to start.
Yeah, and so I'm excited to see more independent filmmakers
certainly
take the reins and do it on bigger budgets.
Yeah.
Hopefully being funded by things like A24 or hopefully some new companies that will start supporting those creative visions.
I would absolutely I don't know, honestly, what I would do. I would have 0 words if something like Mike Flanagan were attached to A24.
Bruh, for real.
That would be fantastic.
Yeah. Just full creative vision, getting to do whatever they want. That would be
guy's a genius.
Fantastic. And so, kind of on the subject of horror a little bit, we're going on to our question of the week. Let's go. But yeah, our question of the week is, what is your favorite kind of horror film? Because there are many different kinds of horror. Because you can have the gruesome, like, torture porn kind of horror where people are just getting ripped apart gruesomely.
Yeah,
Think like,
if you're into Saw, you're into Saw.
Exactly. Like, Saw, Final Destination, that kind of stuff where stuff just gets insane really quick. Or you can like...
There's a time and place for those. I mean, enjoyable.
Exactly. Or you can like the more thriller that's just really suspenseful or psychological. Any of that kind of stuff. So, we want to know, what is your favorite kind of horror, Cormick?
Right. I was kind of, in preparation of the episode, looked at the question and kind of had to ask myself about it because I was like, oh, well, I don't really know.
True, because you're more recently into horror.
Yeah, I used to be really, really bad with horror films. I must have watched Lord of the Rings when I was too young, and Gollum scared me too much, and I just couldn't do it. Exactly, he freaked me out. I was in nightmares and whatnot. Anyway, I as I was just kind of looking at horror things that I really truly enjoyed, I kind of landed on gothic horror.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah,
things like Midnight Mass or The Haunting of Hill House, that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
I totally get that. That's one that I don't think a lot of people are really aware of.
Right? Yeah, it's an interesting.
It's more of like a. I wouldn't necessarily say hidden genre, but you kind of get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's less...
veiled, perhaps.
Yeah, it's less appreciated like a lot of others.
Sure, yeah. It doesn't have the blockbuster titles.
It's true, yeah. I like gothic horror. That's a really good one. I think mine, I'd have to probably go with the psychological horror.
Yeah, those are good.
I like the ones that make you think and you're trying to piece it all together like a puzzle yourself. I think those kind of add to the suspense and put you actually in the situation of those characters that are feeling so much fear. I think that's why I like Talk to Me so much, because it plays the mind games a lot. Because even though it's the paranormal side of things, which I don't mind, I feel like some of them kind of get overplayed a little bit. Like the Insidious movies, I don't necessarily care for. My family loves them, but I'm like,
shrug.
That's all right. But like the Conjuring movies are a paranormal one I really like.
Yeah.
And I think those ones are really good, but it kind of varies on those. But I feel psychological horror almost always gets me. Things like The Lighthouse.
I was just thinking The Lighthouse.
That is not necessarily horror in itself. Like, you don't see that movie and be like, oh yeah, this is a horror movie.
Right.
But the way the music and sound design and acting,
the way it comes together,
exactly, brings all this tension and makes you feel very uneasy. That's the kind of horror I like. And I think it impacts me more than the other kinds of horror. But yeah, that was our favorite kinds of horror. So we want to know yours. So please let us know, either Spotify, Instagram, YouTube, wherever you want to let us know. We want to know what is your favorite kind of horror. And with that, we are at the end of the episode. So thank you so much for listening to us talk to you about Talk to Me.
Funny moments.
It's a pretty good one. If you haven't seen it already, you definitely should.
Go see it.
We haven't really spoiled it too much.
Yeah.
So
take a $5 Tuesday. Just do it.
It is absolutely worth it. You will have a good time if you enjoy horror at all.
Yeah.
So go check it out. And until next time, this has been Easily Entertained.
You have been entertained.